The thunder outside was merciless, drumming against the glass as if the sky itself wanted to warn him. Inside the penthouse, James Carter stood motionless, his reflection split across the window, a man who had everything, except peace. Behind him, Lana's soft voice trembled. "I thought you should know." She stood near the door, her coat soaked, her eyes full of something between fear and courage. For a moment, time froze. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly he turned. "You know what?" His voice was low, sharp, dangerous. Lana's hands pressed against her stomach, a silent truth that stole the air from the room. The fire in his chest turned cold. "You can't be serious," he said, half to himself, half to her. "You knew what this was, Lana. I don't owe you anything." Her lips parted, but she didn't cry. "This isn't about owing. It's about doing what's right." Her voice broke slightly, but her eyes never left his. He stepped closer, anger rising, not because of her words, but because of the part of him that wanted to believe them. "Right?" he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping. "Do you have any idea what this would do to me?" "To everything I've built?" "The world won't collapse if you have a heart," she whispered. He froze. Her words cut deeper than he'd expected. He turned away, his hand gripping the edge of his desk, knuckles white. "I'm not ready for this," he muttered. Then, in a voice colder than the rain outside, he said the words that would destroy them both. "I don't owe you or your child anything." The silence that followed was unbearable. Lana's eyes dimmed, like light fading from a candle. She gave a small nod, almost as if she had expected it. "Then I'll raise this child without you. But remember, James, regret doesn't ask for permission when it returns." She walked out, closing the door gently behind her. For a moment he felt relief, then something heavier, darker. The sound of rain swallowed the city, but all he could hear was the echo of her voice. That night, James stared at the skyline and tried to convince himself he had done the right thing. But deep down, a whisper of doubt began to live in him, one that would grow louder with every passing day. 2 years later, the city looked the same, bright, loud, unstoppable. But James Carter had changed. Success had only sharpened his loneliness. He stood in the middle of his office, surrounded by awards, photographs, and trophies that once meant everything. Now they only reminded him of the life he had traded for ambition. Late at night, when the world slept, he sometimes heard her voice in the silence. "Regret doesn't ask for permission." It echoed like a ghost he could never silence. He had built an empire, but the higher he climbed, the emptier the air became. The parties, the champagne, the applause, it all sounded distant. He tried to tell himself he was fine, that he had made the right choice. But every time he looked into a mirror, he saw eyes that no longer believed him. His assistant once mentioned that Lana had moved to a coastal town, that she was working with a small charity. He had nodded without emotion, but that night he didn't sleep. He told himself not to care, yet he dreamed of her, standing in the rain, eyes shining with pain. One cold morning he was invited to a charity event downtown. He almost declined, but changed his mind at the last second. Maybe he needed to prove to himself that she no longer mattered. The hall was filled with children laughing, their voices pure and unguarded. He felt something strange twist in his chest. Then through the crowd he saw her. Lana, older, stronger, and even more beautiful than he remembered. She was kneeling beside 3 small girls who looked like they had been painted from his memories. James froze. Three little faces with blue eyes stared back at him, eyes that mirrored his own. His heart stuttered, breath catching in his throat. The world seemed a blur. He wanted to step closer, but his legs wouldn't move. One of the girls pointed at him with a curious smile. "Mommy, that man looks like me." Lana's expression faltered for a moment, her hands trembling as she turned to meet his gaze. The air between them filled with years of silence and the weight of every word he had ever spoken. For the first time in his life, James felt small, like everything he had built had crumbled before a single look from the woman he had pushed away. James couldn't breathe. The laughter of the children around him blurred into a soft hum as his gaze locked on the three little girls. They were perfect mirrors, each with his icy blue eyes and the same slight dimple that appeared when they smiled. He felt the air leave his lungs. His heart, the one he had buried under years of pride and success, started to beat painfully fast. Lana stood a few feet away, holding one of the girls' coats. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried storms he could never name. "Mr. Carter?" A voice broke through his trance. It was the event host, smiling brightly, unaware of the hurricane inside him. James nodded absently, his polished charm slipping into place by instinct. But his focus never left the woman who had once walked out of his life. He hadn't expected to ever see her again, and he had certainly never imagined seeing himself reflected in the eyes of three children he had refused to claim. When the event ended, he waited by the exit, his pulse trembling with every second. She finally approached, holding the girls' hands. For a moment they both stood still, two strangers bound by memories neither could escape. "Lana," he said quietly, his voice softer than he intended. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward him briefly before she looked down at the children. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "They're mine," she replied simply. The words hit like a blade wrapped in calm. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to say something that could erase the years between them, but all he managed was a quiet, "I never knew." She gave a small, sad smile. "You never wanted to." Before he could answer, one of the girls tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we go now?" Lana nodded and led them toward the door. James stood there frozen, watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt tears sting his eyes. The man who once shouted he owed nothing now realized he had lost everything that ever truly mattered. That night, James sat in his dark apartment, the city lights flickering across his face like ghosts of all the choices he had made. The image of the three little girls wouldn't leave him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them laughing, holding Lana's hands, their faces glowing with innocence. He poured himself a drink, but even the burn of whiskey couldn't quiet the storm inside. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel powerful. He felt hollow. The man who once thought he could buy the world was now haunted by the one thing money could never replace. He found himself scrolling through his phone, searching her name without even realizing it. Hours passed. He stared at old messages he had never deleted, words that now felt like echoes from another life. "You'll regret this someday." She had been right. That single sentence replayed in his mind, tearing down every wall he had built. Days turned into weeks, and guilt became his shadow. He started visiting the same charity events, hoping to see her again, but she never appeared. Instead, he learned from others that Lana lived in a small coastal town, far from the chaos of the city. People spoke of her kindness, her strength, and her 3 daughters who brightened every room they entered. Hearing those stories broke him in ways he couldn't describe. One afternoon, James drove for hours until the skyline disappeared behind him. He didn't have a plan, just a quiet need to see her, to see them. The air grew softer, the sea breeze brushing against his window as he reached the small town. Children were playing near the beach, their laughter floating through the air. Then he saw her. Lana was sitting on a wooden bench, her hair tied loosely, watching the girls chase the waves. The sunlight caught her face, and he saw peace there, a peace that didn't include him. His chest tightened. He wanted to go to her, to say something, but his voice failed him. Instead, he watched from a distance, realizing how life had moved forward without him. The girls ran toward her, hugging her legs, their laughter filling the air. In that moment, James understood the real meaning of loss. It wasn't about what you lost, but what you were never brave enough to keep. James returned to his hotel that night, unable to shake the sight of them. The laughter of those little girls echoed in his mind like music he had no right to hear. He sat by the window, staring at the ocean stretching endlessly into the horizon. The sound of waves reminded him of her voice, steady, soft, and full of quiet strength. Every memory he had buried was now clawing its way back to the surface. He thought about the night he had turned his back, the way her eyes had shimmered before she left. He had chosen pride over love, and now it was pride that kept him alone. The next morning, he walked to the small market near the harbor. He didn't expect to see her there, yet fate seemed determined to confront him. Lana was standing at a stall, helping an elderly woman arrange handmade jewelry, the kind of pieces she once designed. He watched as people greeted her warmly, as the little girls ran around her giggling, their hair glowing in the sunlight. There was something about that simple, peaceful picture that made his heart ache. He gathered the courage to step closer. She noticed him instantly. For a long moment neither spoke. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her tone calm but guarded. "I had to see you," he replied. "I had to see them," Lana shook her head, her eyes firm. "They don't need your curiosity, James. They need stability, and I've built that without you." He felt the sting of her words but didn't turn away. "I was wrong," he said softly. "Every day since that night I've known it. I just didn't know how to face it." Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. The girls ran back to her, holding seashells in their small hands. "Look, Mommy," one of them shouted. Lana smiled and knelt beside them, her warmth pulling every gaze toward her. James stood there, watching, realizing that love wasn't always about being needed. It was about deserving to be part of someone's peace. And in that moment, he finally understood. Forgiveness was not something he could demand. It was something he would have to earn, one selfless act at a time. Days passed, but James couldn't leave the town. Every morning he found himself driving to the same beach, parking far enough to watch without being seen. He watched them build sandcastles, chase seagulls, and laugh as the waves touched their feet. It was a happiness he had never known, pure, effortless, and real. For the first time, he understood what he had destroyed. His wealth, his empire, his success, all of it felt meaningless compared to the simple joy of a family he had walked away from. The guilt grew heavier each day until he finally decided he couldn't keep watching from the shadows. He had to do something. He found the courage to visit the charity center where Lana volunteered. When she saw him at the door, her eyes filled with surprise, then hesitation. "Why are you here again, James?" she asked, folding her arms. He took a breath. "Because I want to help. Not to fix the past, but to do something good. Maybe it's too late for me, but it's not too late to become someone better." She studied him for a long time, searching for the arrogance that once ruled him. But it was gone. All she saw was sincerity. "If you're serious," she said softly, "then start by giving, not taking." That was the moment everything changed. James began funding the children's programs anonymously, never telling anyone his name. He spent hours cleaning the beach, rebuilding playgrounds, and donating to families who needed it most. Slowly, he rebuilt himself, not as a CEO, but as a man trying to make peace with his soul. Months later, Lana saw him again at a community event. This time the girls ran up to him without fear. "You helped fix our swings." One of them giggled. He smiled, kneeling beside them, tears welling in his eyes. Lana watched silently, her heart softening. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, but he had changed. As the sun set, James stood beside Lana, the golden light wrapping around them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but thank you for giving me the chance to become someone worthy of it." Lana looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Maybe forgiveness isn't something you ask for," she whispered. "Maybe it's something you live." And for the first time in years, James smiled, not the smile of a millionaire, but of a man finally free.